Good morning, everyone. Lance Tarchioni finally here with you on Ask the Agronomist this morning. Adam, if you wouldn't mind, reach back and close the door there. Adam and I joining you here from the Nutrient Studios, south of lovely drenched Macomb, Illinois. Adam and I were just checking our climate weather reports here to see how much rain we had over the night, and so far a lot of fields in my count and his account showing an inch plus, a good solid inch of rain last night. So it came down pretty hard at our house. Actually woke me up this morning at about 5. It was coming down so hard. Did not see a lot of water standing around as I drove into Macomb this morning, and not much frost on the ground. There's been a lot of talk about, what's the impact of no minimal freezing, I guess I would say, this winter. I tend to think that gets overblown a little bit. So I could do a MythBuster session here on Ask the Agronomist this morning and say how I'm not convinced that recharging subsoil moisture is as critical as everybody says, and I'm not sure freezing and thawing is as critical as everybody says, and make a lot of people think I'm an idiot. So we might delve into that a little bit. Want to talk about our Yield Chaser banquet, which we had last week. Very proud of that, our first year effort in that, and thanks to our customers and dealers that supported that effort. We had I think about 110-ish people at the banquet, Adam, last week. Very nice. Had a nice venue in East Peoria. Really good steak. Lots of compliments on. So kudos to the caterer that really knows how to cook a piece of beef, and we had some really good prime rib steaks. If you've ever been to any of Precision Planting's conferences and thought the steaks were pretty good, same dude. So he knows what he's doing. And so we had some really good information. Dr. Belo was there. Always great when Dr. Belo graces us with his presence, and shared a lot of really good information. And we're hoping next year's event will be bigger, even bigger and better. So if you didn't enter Yield Chasers this year, think about doing it next year, or this year now. And if you're thinking about doing it this year, maybe think about some things you want to do different. Make sure you're picking the right hybrid. Make sure you're picking the right field. Talk to your retail applicator and see if there's any special applications or anything you want to do different in your contest field. And we kind of dedicated last episode of Ask the Agronomist to going through some of those thought processes that you might want to consider if your intent is to win a yield contest. We also went through that same information at the Yield Chaser banquet. So some of you have already heard me go through that twice. So I ain't doing it again. So don't get nervous if you think I'm going to rehash all of that. But anyway, thanks to those of you that made it to the Yield Chaser banquet. Excuse me. yeah. See. I was at Adam's fighting a bit of a cold here, and I told him don't be hacking up a lung and coughing on air, and here I am doing it actually not just on air but on camera too, so you get to not only see it but you get to hear it. So that's nice. Real professionals here on Ask the Agronomist. But we are here in spite of being a little under the weather this morning. But anyway, great event last week in Peoria with Yield Chasers. We're already thinking about next year's event. Already thinking about possible speakers. I think we're wearing Dr. Belo out a little bit with the number between he and his graduate students. I don't know how many Yield Chaser banquets they did across the Midwest, but I know Dr. Belo himself personally did at least 3 in Illinois only. And his Connor Sybil, one of his graduate students, was in, I think, Kentucky, doing one last week as well. So we've probably overdone it a little bit, imposing on Dr. Belo to come speak for us. But thanks to Dr. Belo and his students for supporting that. And really, the research he does is a perfect message for something like Yield Chasers. I mean, his work is all about figuring out why certain things contribute to yield, and understanding that and how you can apply those principles on your farm Plus, he's just super entertaining to listen to as a speaker. So if you've never heard Dr. Belo, and we actually have we've got a teammate that said that last Thursday at our Yield Chaser Bank was the first time he saw Dr. Belo speak. So I didn't realize there was anybody left that hadn't seen Dr. Belo speak before. But please, if you haven't had an opportunity to see Dr. Belo, go someplace. He'll have a field day at U of I this probably. Is that August? I think maybe.
I think it's going to be in July.
July. Okay. So U of I no longer does Agronomy Day anymore, but essentially everybody was going to Agronomy Day to see Dr. Belo. And so when Agronomy Day got shut down kind of through COVID and budget cuts and all that kind of stuff, last year, Dr. Belo had his first, essentially Agronomy Day for his program. Run by him and his students, and it was awesome. And I know they're looking forward to doing that again this summer. So be a great opportunity to check that out and see what they're doing down there at U of I and his program.
We got a lot of awesome feedback, like you said, Lance, from Dr. Belo's talk at the Yield Chasers banquet, but had a lot of people walking away still wanting more, and a lot of the questions were revolving around fertility, different sources of fertilizer, different timings, different placements, all those sort of things. Also, a lot of questions. They wanted to know more. He gave some teasers on some of the other stuff that he did, which kind of everybody asking for more, and biologicals are another one. So I'm glad you called out his field day that he's going to have this summer, because that'll be an opportunity for everybody to see a lot more and hear a lot more details on those types of things. And always go to his website.
Well, I was going to say, I know you know the website. Put it in the chat if you want. But yeah, the crop physiology website there at U of I, all the work that they've done that can be published publicly is published on that website. So if you want to look at what products they've tested, I know they've started doing the last couple of years more biological testing. Sometimes it's hard to get some of those suppliers to agree to some of the parameters of their testing, but those who would agree to being part of a published study, that data is out there, and you can look at those products compared head to head with each other. So a lot of great work they're doing, and really appreciate Adam's relationship with Dr. Belo, and that's a great advantage to us when we ask him to help us with stuff. So we don't want to overdo the privilege that we have of working with Dr. Belo, but it's a lot of fun. So I'm going to tell you about something else I did just yesterday, actually, that was also a lot of fun as well. So we have what we call a new seller training program here at DeKalb Asgrow. So we work with a lot of retail sales organizations. We're here at Nutrien right now, and they hire a lot of young people to be operators and applicators and salesmen, and there's just a constant turnover of people within those retail organizations. So we've always got people that are brand new to a seed selling role. And so we've got this program we call New Seller Development. And so we handpick a select number of new people that, we think have the potential to become great people if they get trained up and taught in the right way in the seed business. And we had a session with this group yesterday at our Farmer City production facility. And part of the program was we got to go on a tour of that facility. And I've been through that facility before. This was, I think, the third time I've been through that plant, but they keep changing things, keep tweaking things. And every time I go through there, I learn something new. And if you've never been through a modern seed corn or soybean production facility, I would encourage you to find an opportunity to go through one of those. They're pretty neat tours. They love showing off their sites. They take the time to, if a group of people, a group of farmers or dealers or whoever wants to come through on a tour, FFA group, school kids, it doesn't matter. Those places love telling people about the facility and telling people what they do. And we've got plants scattered all over the state. So our main ones in Illinois would be Farmer City is the biggest corn production facility in Illinois. And actually, depending on how you count it, Now, I think our folks at Constantine, Michigan, would maybe disagree a little bit with the guys at Farmer City, but based on their ability as far as how many bags of seed they can produce in an hour when they're running, Farmer City, Illinois, is our biggest seed plant in the country, and they hit some new milestones this year. Very proud of that facility, and it's really interesting to walk through there on a tour, especially if you get a really good tour guide like I did with the group that I was with. But we've also got facilities at Waterman, Illinois, which was formerly a corn production facility that has been converted to soybean production. They still raise some corn up there, but that corn is actually all moved down to Farmer City for processing. Then we've got a corn facility at Illiopolis, Illinois, and a huge soybean facility at Centralia, Illinois, and another soybean facility at Stonington, Illinois. So those are the plants, kind of near to this area, and all of those plants offer tours. If you have an interest in that, talk to your local Asgrow DeKalb rep, talk to your dealer. Really encourage our dealers to get groups of customers together and go through those facilities. I think farmers would appreciate a lot and learn a lot from going through. Probably takes 2 hours to do justice to a whole plant tour. We crammed it in about an hour yesterday at Farmer City. If you do want to go to a seed plant, they also told us that the best time for farmers to go would actually be right before you start your harvest, because we're in the middle of our harvest, and about 2 weeks after we start harvest, every piece of equipment in that plant is running, because we've got fresh corn coming in. We've got corn that has been dried and shelled that's going through conditioning, treating, bagging, packaging. So the first day they start, not everything's running, and they're winding down at this time of year. And there's no harvest activity going on right now. So the sweet spot to tour a seed corn plant, and soybeans would not be too much different than this, would actually be early September. So if you can make time to schedule your tour for early September, that's when you're going to see every piece of equipment that they've got in those multi-million-dollar facilities in operation. A lot of robotics in there, a lot of technology, a lot of things we've learned over the years, how to do it right, how to do it efficiently, how to do it in a way that maintains quality, how to ensure purity, the safeguards and the technology that's involved in making sure that we're handling that seed in a right way to get a high quality product to you. The number of things that are automated today, there's a lot of people who work there. There's about 75 full-time people that work at Farmer City. If not for the robots that were in there, I don't know how many people it would take to, hand sew, for example, all those bags that are coming out of there. And I don't think I'd want the job of stitching, every other bag as it went by on the conveyor line. But neat facility, and really all of those plants are a good tour. So also wanted to address something here. You're probably hearing some talk in the marketplace. There's been an expectation or an assumption, or I guess an expectation would be the best way to say it, that there was going to be a dicamba label update coming before the 2023 use season. And we anticipate that is still going to be the case. That update has not come out yet. The registrants, so Bayer would be a registrant. A registrant would be a company that sells a product in that market. So the registrants that sell over-the-top dicamba formulations in Xtend soybeans have submitted their proposed labels to EPA. EPA is still considering, whether it's going to accept those proposals or whether there's going to be some back and forth negotiation. So we don't know exactly what, the 2023 use season label is going to look like. But some of our competitors are talking about what they think the label is going to look like, and farmers are nervous. In some cases, they're hearing about additional restrictions to the label. I think it's probably a safe assumption to make that there will be additional restrictions to the federal label. Now, the reality is Illinois has always had one of the most restrictive state labels in the country. So the federal label has actually never been as restrictive as Illinois' state label. And you can't be, a state cannot make its label less restrictive than the federal label, but it is allowed to make it more restrictive than the federal label if it wants to. Now, over time, the federal label keeps getting closer to where Illinois has always been. And I think that trend is going to continue. Some of the proposals that are being considered would move the cutoff date up and would reduce the growth stage, allowance for when you can make a post-emergence application. None of the proposed changes, honestly, would have changed anything in the state of Illinois last year, because the most restrictive thing we have in the state of Illinois is probably the temperature restriction. There is not a proposal to add a temperature restriction to the federal label that I'm aware of. That temperature restriction is not going away in Illinois. Illinois EPA has already said they're not making any changes to the state label. So unless the federal label gets more restrictive than the Illinois state label has been, the changes in Illinois will be minimal. Now, in other parts of the country, the changes could be more significant because not every state has had a label as restrictive as Illinois. Now, the other thing I'd like to point out too is all of this only matters if you're planning on using dicamba in crop. If you're using dicamba in your pre, which everybody should be doing, whether you're a no-tiller or conventional tiller, dicamba in your pre adds a tremendous amount of weed control to that system. We've got Liberty as an option, along with Roundup and residuals and other products to control weeds post-emergence if you don't feel comfortable or don't want to or can't use dicamba post. So we need to keep in mind all of these changes, are really only going to impact the people that were planning on using dicamba probably late post, which we've been encouraging people to go early. In a perfect world, we'd be done spraying dicamba before the 1st of June. If you think about when we normally try to plant beans, and you think about trying to get that post-emergence on within, 2 to 3 weeks of crop emergence, you're going to be making a lot of late May, very early June post-emergence applications if you're following the system the way we're recommending it. So I don't think, there's been a few growers that have, I think, overreacted, in my opinion, to some of the talk in the marketplace about how the label might change. I don't really see any reason why you can't, be successful with your XtendFlex soybeans in 23, either with or without dicamba. I would also mention that we have really enhanced our respray programs to where they are extremely generous, in my opinion, as a farmer, as far as how much money is available for resprays, even if you don't use dicamba post. So there is coverage for you if you're not using dicamba post, and you should have confidence that with that XtendFlex system, you've got plenty of flexibility, plenty of options to get good weed control, whether you feel comfortable using dicamba post-emergence or not. So with that, I won't spend any more time on that. There'll be more news to come on that when the label is actually published. You probably won't be able to miss it when that happens, because that's what everybody will be talking about. What's it say? What's it say? What's it say? I think I'm comfortable saying it's going to get more restrictive. So don't be surprised when that happens. And I would ask you not to overreact when that happens as well. So enough said about that. If we, I always love your questions. So if anybody has any questions, please chat them in. And, I feel like I'm talking too much today and not answering enough questions. So hopefully somebody is in the mood to ask some questions. I had a really interesting email yesterday I got from from a follower of the program, and he'd run across. This guy's obviously far more in the know than I am about what's going on in academic research. He had run across an interesting article published on soil fertility that was talking about the old chart that's been around for about 100 years or thereabouts, that shows the pH and the availability of different nutrients across a range of pHs. And basically the midpoint of that chart, where the most products are the most available, which is kind of what we think we're trying to achieve, would be a pH in the mid 6-ish range. And so this particular individual is a big believer in soil pH, and has based his entire fertility program around intensively managing soil pH based on this chart that we've all seen. It's in every textbook that I've ever looked at. It's everywhere. It's been everywhere for decades. And the interesting thing is, some people looked at the data that went into that research that created that chart and discovered that there wasn't a tremendous amount of data behind what went into creating that chart. There were a lot of assumptions that were made when that chart was created, and the authors of the paper that initially, designed the chart, built the chart, shared the chart, didn't necessarily claim that, they knew everything about soil pH interactions. That was kind of a plausible theory as to how it worked. And it's actually pretty easy, if you look through all the research that has happened since then, to shoot some holes in that chart. And this gentleman was very upset by that, and thought, gosh, I based my whole program on this chart. What if the chart's completely wrong? Well, I don't know that means that your pH management is wrong, even if the chart's not perfect. And I don't see any data really to support that we ought to be managing pH significantly differently than we are. So whether that chart is the gospel, as many people have maybe incorrectly assumed for decades, or not worth the paper it's printed on, I'm not sure that means we're doing anything wrong from a pH standpoint. And I don't personally see any reason, even if the chart's not right, to necessarily, radically change how we're managing pH. Another point that the authors of this study made was that every different crop has different nutrient needs, which we've always known that. And depending on which nutrient you need the most, that may impact what is the optimal pH for a different crop. So some crops do better in acid soils. Some crops do better in alkaline soils. Soybeans, for example, legumes have been known to do better at higher pHs. Corn is not as sensitive to pH. So we've always, to me, that's not news either. We've always understood, or at least I think most people do, that the optimum pH for corn and soybeans and alfalfa and wheat and vegetable crops, and it can vary, and every soil is different, and it would be really impossible to have one picture that represents every crop, every soil, every environment, every scenario. So if that's the way you interpreted that chart, that's probably wrong. But the authors of the chart didn't ask you to interpret it that way. We've just seen the thing for so long in so many textbooks and so many agronomy guides, and it's out there everywhere. And yeah, if it proves to be not accurate at all, that seems a little crazy that we all just assumed it was for all these years. But whether it's right or whether it's not right, I don't know that changes how you manage pH on your farm. So I guess we may dig into that more as the future unfolds. But just an interesting thing I wanted to share, because we had a customer that sent that to me and had a question about it. So
I'm sure it can be tweaked, and I'm guessing the generalizations of it are pretty accurate, but that's what they are. And I think you made a good point there, Lance, that it's not gospel.
Right.
It's
right.
generalizations that vary greatly among soil types and different crops. And, Noah actually just commented, Lance, he says, I appreciate you reading the paper and putting together a thoughtful response on pH and lime. So
Yeah.
I think we need to keep doing what we're doing. I think it's also maybe even a little bit of a tie into the advocacy that I have and Dr. Beal and others you have got as well. And we're kind of moving as an industry towards feeding the crop and
Right.
not so much trying to feed the soil.
Right.
To try and get better efficiencies out of everything that we're doing, try to get less loss of nutrients and all these bad things. So.
And to go along with that, we should probably spend more time than we do testing the crop instead of the soil.
Exactly.
So the whole point of that original premise of optimizing soil pH technically had nothing to do with soil pH. It was related to maximizing the availability of these essential plant nutrients. So the important part is making sure that the plant gets what it needs. In theory, the pH of the soil is irrelevant if the plant's getting what it needs. And that's some of the things that the authors of this study that Noah shared with us were making, was that there are plenty of examples where the pH is not optimum, but the plant's still getting what it needs to be productive. And they were saying that discredits the original premise. Well, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But to Adam's point, the important part is not what the pH is. Is the plant getting what it needs? And the soil test, regardless of pH, isn't going to tell you if the plant's getting what it needs. What tells you if the plant's getting what it needs is partly the performance of the plant, what kind of yields are you achieving, and what's actually in the plant, which you could learn from a tissue test. So tissue testing is an inexact science as well. It's a lot of work. It's expensive. There are limitations to it, but that's probably something we should be doing more of to find out what's actually in the plant. And if there's not enough nutrient in the plant, does that mean there's not enough in the soil? It's not available enough, maybe because of pH, or, who knows why, some other reason. Or, is it a root issue with the crop that they can't intercept it? Is it a placement issue with, should we be banding? I know Dr. Belo's done a lot of work with banding. Dr. Belo has a lot of data to support that as you increase populations, the root mass of those crop plants gets smaller. And so at higher seeding rates, which we continue to push higher seeding rates, we've got a smaller root mass. We are exploring less square inches of soil with each plant. And so Dr. Belo's theory is if you've got a smaller root mass, exploring less soil, you need to have a higher concentration of nutrients in the zone where those roots are to continue to feed that plant adequately. And so that gets into things like banding and timing of application, and perhaps choice of product, and a lot of other things that can really exponentially complicate what we do. And each individual producer really has to make their own decision of how far into OCD type of farming are they willing to go to optimize all this stuff, because it gets complicated. And at some point you may go, hey, I'm out. I'm okay where I'm at. I'm happy with my yields. I'm profitable. I enjoy this job, and I'm not going to go any further into it. Or you can go all in crazy and explore all the different ways that you can increase yield and increase nutrient uptake in plants. And we're all going to decide where we want to be on that continuum. So thanks, Noah, for sharing that. I would not have ever seen that article had you not sent it to me. So appreciate keeping your eye out for stuff like that and sharing it with us. So I'll touch on. I joked a little bit earlier about a lot of people have been worried that we've never really been frozen this winter. We've had some surface frost. Didn't really get a lot of depth to the frost. Didn't really get a hard freeze. When we had some cold weather, we had snow coverage. We did have a blast of cold there before Christmas before we got snow. So that was really the only time the ground was probably frozen at any depth was a couple weeks there around Christmas. And since then, we've either been too warm or we've had insulating snow that's prevented freezing. We just got an inch of rain last night, an inch of hard rain in February. Usually an inch of hard rain in February causes some pretty serious flooding because the ground's froze and it all runs off. And we're soaking all that moisture in. That's another thing we'll touch on here about the moisture levels in the subsoil. But there's an old, and I don't exactly know where this got started, but it's been around probably longer than that pH chart's been around. This notion that freezing and thawing is what creates soil tilth and soil quality. And if you don't have freezing and thawing cycles, your soil's not going to work right in the spring, and it's just not good. So there definitely is, freezing and thawing, heaving of freezing and thawing does alleviate compaction. It does weather the soil down, but wetting and drying and things weather the soil as well. The passage of time weathers the soil. And in my opinion, spring soil conditions have far more to do with moisture when you're in the field in the spring than it does what kind of winter weather that you had. When guys tell me, man, the winter just wasn't right. This soil's it's just not working good. It's just not working the way I want it to. Well, it's usually because it's too damn wet is the reason it's not working the way you want it to. Not because it didn't freeze enough in the wintertime. So, half of the country never freezes in the wintertime. And they raise some pretty good crops. So I don't necessarily think that a lack of freezing in the winter is going to make our soil just horrible to work with in the spring. You can get into, if you're in the entomology side of things, I mean, you can talk about different insect populations that might be favored by warm, mild winters. There was a year, several years ago, where we had just amazing grub pressure. I remember digging in fields looking for corn. It was easier to find grubs than it was corn. And that's a pest that, maybe they like a milder winter. Things like flea beetles, which we never even talk about flea beetles. Flea beetles are certainly favored by warm weather conditions. That's more of an issue with seed corn production because some inbreds are very susceptible to Stewart's wilt, which is a bacterial disease that's vectored by flea beetles. Most hybrids are tolerant enough to it. It's not that big a deal. But, I would say a warm winter probably has more of an impact on insect populations, perhaps, than it does, soil health and soil tilth and soil quality and what kind of shape your soil is going to be in the spring. So I probably irritated the hell out of some people. I'll probably get nasty grams about, what a doofus I am because freezing and thawing is the absolute most beautiful thing that ever happens to soil. But I think we'll get through that. So while I'm irritating people, I'm also going to question, how critical it is that we recharge our subsoil with moisture. So if you've been doing any tiling this winter, it is dry. The subsoil is definitely dry. There is not, once you get more than about a foot down, that stuff's pretty good to work with. And the guys that tile for a living have been talking about how dry it was. We don't see any tile lines running. We got dry enough on the surface. There were a few guys snuck out in the field for a couple days here a few days ago, did some anhydrous, did some tillage. It's pretty dry for February. I'll grant you that. The reality, however, is that our soils, this varies by soil type, but in general, most of our soils can hold about 10 inches of plant available water. I'd say 8 to 10 inches would probably be the range that most soils are in. If you've got a sandy soil, it's going to be way less than that. If you've got the perfect soil, it might be slightly more than 10 inches. 10 inches of moisture is not going to get you through the summer. Is it better to have a recharged soil if it never rains the rest of the year? Absolutely. The problem I see with a recharged subsoil is a recharged subsoil is more likely to make the surface be wet in the spring. So in a perfect world, I would say we start the year dry and then we gradually get wetter as you go through the growing season. Now, we can't script that. We can't make that happen unless you've got irrigation. If you've got irrigation, you want enough moisture to get the crop up. You want enough moisture to keep the crop growing. You want enough moisture so that the crop is not stressed. Normally in Illinois, we got way more moisture in the spring, way more moisture in May, and way more moisture in June than that crop needs or wants in some cases. That's part of the reason, I think we mentioned this maybe a couple weeks ago on Ask the Agronomist, that's part of the reason that some parts of the country actually have an advantage over us in some of these yield contest kind of environments because they're never too wet. We are frequently too wet, and you can't fix that. Even if you spend $1,200 an acre on tile, it's still going to be too wet. It helps a bunch, but it doesn't eliminate, all of the too wet conditions that we sometimes have. So I don't get really, I'm not going to lose sleep at night because the subsoil is dry going into spring. If we get timely rains in July and August, it won't matter what the subsoil was. And if we don't get timely rains in July and August, it also won't matter what the subsoil was because we're going to have a shitty crop. Pardon my French. So what determines our crop yield year in and year out is July and August weather. It's never good to be dry, but spring is the best time to be dry in Illinois. Now we are not, I'm not talking to guys in Western Kansas, Panhandle of Texas, Oklahoma. If you're in a wheat fallow rotation, then subsoil moisture is vitally important to you because subsoil moisture is all you're going to get. And what you get in your subsoil recharge moisture, that's what you have to raise a crop off of. That's not the way we operate in Illinois. We've got year in and year out more rain than it takes to raise a crop. The issue we have is the distribution isn't right. We get too much at the wrong time. The flip side of this argument is somebody asked me the other day, they'd seen a long range forecast that was saying it was going to be a wet spring. Oh, good grief. Why even talk about that? We can't do anything about it. And wet springs also don't mean we're going to have a horrible crop. 2019 was a really wet spring, pain in the butt, finished planting way later than you wanted to, couldn't start harvest as early as you wanted to, had a lot of wet crop that needed to be dried, but it was a good year. Why? Not because we planted late, not because it was too wet in the spring, not because the soil was recharged. It was because it rained in July and August. And we were darn lucky that year that we got good rains in August because that crop was so late. Had we not gotten good rains in August, it would have been pretty poor. So all of these things that we worry about, stress about, they can be important. They are oftentimes not. And just like that chart we were talking about, they're all taken out of context as the gospel. And people think that, I'm doomed if, my subsoil is dry, or I'm doomed if I plant late, or I'm doomed if this, or I'm doomed if that. You don't really know any of that because we don't know what's going to happen, later on through the growing season. So crops are resilient. Farmers are resilient, fortunately, because you got to be. And generally we will find a way to prevail. And if we can't, because Mother Nature is always holding the trump card, we'll deal with it because there's nothing we can do to change it. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say on that topic. So one more thing I had on my list here, and this is kind of a personal thing, and I do want to send prayers and well wishes out to an avid watcher and listener and contributor to the program here this morning. So he's known to us on here as Dirt Doctorful. I won't say his name because I don't want to invade his privacy, but I learned at the Yield Chaser banquet that his wife is battling a pretty serious cancer diagnosis, and Adam and I wanted to send our thoughts and prayers out to him and really appreciate his friendship and support of the program over the years, and hope for the best for he and his wife and their family. Super good people. I get reminded when I make it to church on Sundays that just being good people doesn't mean bad things won't happen to you, and we're thinking about you. So anyway, I don't really have a tremendous amount of other stuff I wanted to cover here today. We're not being overrun with questions. There's nothing wrong with ending early. They say I never end early, Adam. But anything you want to interject here this morning to keep us going?
One thing that I had a conversation with a customer the other day, a grower the other day, was regarding cover crops and terminating them.
Oh, so, yeah.
You might want to touch on that. You know, how soon is too early? What do you think the sweet spot is for doing that?
Well, so good question. And we were talking about soil moisture. The real techie cover crop guru people, they will look at subsoil moisture as an indicator of when they should terminate. And if it's excessively wet, they'll let that stuff grow. Because you can actually, and this is another thing that people argue about and misunderstand, in my opinion, you can remove more water from the soil through living vegetation than you can evaporate just because the sun's shining on the soil. So if you've got a knee-high cereal rye crop out there in your field, that's using more water than is going to evaporate from that soil after you kill it. And I've actually seen this proven to me. Grower, and I believe they were in Hancock County. They did a little experiment one year. They had a landlord that wanted to try some cover crops. And I don't remember if it was the landlord or the farmer that was not all in on this idea, but they decided to split this field and do an experiment. Turned out to be a wet spring. They were planting beans, and so they were pushing it a little bit, which I'm okay with, pushing it in the spring on beans. And they were barely getting through the field with the cover crop on the cover crop side of the farm. And it was marginal conditions. They knew it was marginal conditions. They were no-tilling soybeans into that cover crop. If it had been corn, they wouldn't have been out there. They knew it was marginal. As soon as they crossed over into the side of the field that there was no cover crop on, they couldn't go. I mean, it was just literally mud. I mean, plugging up the gauge wheels on the planter, they made a couple rounds on that side of the field and quit. And that was a scenario where the cover crop had actually dried the soil out. Now, probably more frequent perception is it happens the other way around. The residue from that cover crop is covering the soil, preventing it from drying out. Now, dead cover crop residue will do that. But a live green growing cover crop is actually pumping a lot of water out of that soil. Another experience I've had where I witnessed this on my own farm, we used to bale hay on an old pasture. Didn't have any fence on it, so we were baling it for hay rather than using it as a pasture. And there was a wet, swampy area that was solid reed canary grass. And if you've ever been around reed canary grass, it grows in a swamp better than almost anything. It produces tonnage like nothing else. Cows won't hardly eat the stuff. They got to be damn near starving to death before they'll eat reed canary grass. It's not particularly palatable. It's not really considered to be a desirable forage, but it does have one desirable characteristic. It damn near can grow underwater. So anyway, this wet area was reed canary grass. And every year when we'd mow it, we could get through it. Now it was wet. We were leaving some cleat marks with the mower, but you could get it mowed. And then when you tried to rake it 2 or 3 days later, water standing everywhere. Your windrows just literally sopping wet, laying in water. We finally got smart enough to quit mowing the darn area because it was just too much trouble. And that soil every year would get wetter after you cut that plant off because the plant quit transpiring water, and those growing plants use a lot more water than just is going to evaporate off the surface. So long-winded answer here, but depending on the species of the cover crop, depending on what crop you're going to be planting. So my personal opinion, if you've got cover crop ahead of corn, don't be fooling around. That stuff needs to be killed early. I'm not a big fan of planting green with corn. I'm okay with that on soybeans. I think you can plant soybeans into green standing rye and spray it after you plant it. You can spray it. I would rather spray it about 12 hours before I plant it, and then it'll probably get better kill than spraying it after you plant. But the size of the cover crop, if it's annual ryegrass instead of cereal ryegrass, that stuff needs to be killed smaller because it's harder to kill. Cereal ryegrass is a little more forgiving as far as the size of it goes. You got to consider, can I get all that material through my planter? If I've got row cleaners on, are they going to plug up? Are they going to wrap up? Is your planter designed to function with a lot of that residue there? So it kind of depends on a lot of things. Depends on what crop you're planting. It depends on your planting equipment. If you want to consider that soil moisture thing, if you think it's going to be a dry spring, you need to kill early and conserve moisture. If you think it's going to be a wet spring, well, then you need to let it grow and let it pump water, excess moisture out of the soil. So we don't have excess moisture at this point in time. So if you're using cover crops to manage soil moisture, you would maybe lean towards killing early. My personal preference is probably to plant into a cover crop that's already been terminated rather than plant first and terminate later. It also depends on, how much weed control are you hoping to get from that cover crop. If you're using a heavy, thick stand of cereal rye in place of residual chemistry, or if you're skimping on your weed control program because of your cover crop, there may be a benefit to letting it get bigger, because the more biomass that's there, the more weed suppression you're going to get out of it. So it depends on a lot of factors and what you're trying to accomplish. I would say in general, soybeans are a lot more forgiving of being planted into big, heavy, killed off late, or maybe not even killed yet cover crop than corn is. And, other than that, I think it's, there's a lot of variables that are involved in that. So anything else, Adam, you'd add to
that? Well, Lance Lovelace piped in another question about cover crops. He wanted to know, can cover crops be helpful in trying to help migrate fertilizer that's in the top couple inches down deeper into the soil profile?
So I would say, the root channels, anything that's growing in the soil is going to leave a channel when it deteriorates. Earthworms make channels. Those channels in the soil, those big macropores, those channels that water is actually flowing down, the water can carry stuff with it as it flows down. So maybe through, root channels, after those roots deteriorate, the plant, everything's going up in the plant. So the plant is actually bringing nutrients from depth up into the upper part of the plant, and then that upper part deteriorates on the surface. So I would say more of it is going the other direction than is going down. There's more coming up. And that's one of the possible schools of thought. Is to one thing that could be a benefit from cover crops from a nutrient cycling standpoint is they're concentrating more nutrients close to the surface. And generally speaking, nutrients close to the surface are easier for the plant to get. Now you can get, off in the weeds of some people say, well, if the top 2 inches is dry, I can't get the nutrients out of that top 2 inches because it's dry. And so if you've got a whole bunch of nutrition right at the surface and it's dry, that nutrition is unavailable to the plant. So that could be a negative. That is true. But, assuming you've got moisture, keeping the nutrition closer to the roots is a good thing. But as far as helping move nutrients down from the surface, the only way I could think of a cover crop doing that would be as if it's the root, pathways and tunnels and stuff that are maybe left in that root structure. Now, if you're doing tillage, you're going to destroy all that anyway. But if this is a long-term no-till system, when the roots of that crop decay, is that going to leave a channel that stuff could maybe percolate down through, perhaps? But if you think about the way the plant grows, the roots are pulling it in, the plant's growing up. the plant dies, that residue falls on the surface, and then those nutrients are released out of that decaying residue on the surface. So I would say probably more stuff coming up than going down, but you could make the argument that it could go both ways. Earthworm channels, probably the environment that cover crops make for earthworms, maybe making a better environment for them could increase your earthworm population. Probably get more stuff moving down through earthworm channels than you do through cover crop root channels, but I haven't done the research on that, so I'm just speculating.
Yeah. I'd say it probably varies a little bit by what type of cover crop you're using as well.
Right.
If you're using a monocot, I'd say definitely you're probably migrating things more upwards than downwards. And I'd say even with, the dicots, the big taproot cover crops, I think you're probably still doing that more than what you're bringing it down. The taproots are probably enabling.
Yeah. If you think about a radish, for example, I mean, when that radish dies, and if you leave a hole in the soil the size of your thumb, stuff's going to cave off and fall down into that hole. And what's at the surface it's kind of like running an aerator through your yard. You're poking holes in it, and stuff's going to fall down in those holes. And so, I could see a good crop of radishes would probably do that a lot more than cereal rye or annual rye. So good question. A lot of talk about cover crops. A lot of if you want information, there is an army of people out there that are just passionate around cover crops, and we've actually got agronomist that works for us now that lives in Fulton County. Actually, that he specializes in those cover crop conservation type systems. And if you're looking for more information on that, as far as what species to plant, seeding rates, when to terminate, another area that we've looked into, I know some of our TDRs have done work on this, is, if you're going to get serious about cover crops, you need to think a little bit about what type of herbicide program you're using in your row crops, because there are some products that are persistent enough that they carry over long enough. They don't necessarily carry over to the next year's crop, but they persist long enough that they screw up your cover crop seeding. So if you're trying to get cute with your cover crops and use, some brassica species and some dicot type stuff that's sensitive to some chemistry, you may want to be careful with what you use in your post-emergence corn program primarily, because some of those products can impact your success with cover crop seeding. If you're just doing cereal rye is pretty tough. Cereal rye is pretty forgiving. Things like oats, annual rye, cereal rye, we don't tend to have too much trouble with that kind of stuff. But if you're doing radishes, turnips, brassica plants of some kind, some of these pretty persistent HPPD chemistries that we're using in corn, not helpful to getting those cover crops established. So, any other questions come in to the chat, Adam?
Not right now.
Okay.
We'll be back on the 23rd.
All right, that's the day before my birthday. So we'll be back the day before I get another year older, and we'll look forward to that. Thanks for your questions this morning, and everybody stay warm, stay dry. Supposed to be 55-mile-an-hour winds this afternoon. I heard, Adam, I think so. Watch out for that. And as soon as I get off the air here, I'm going to call the nice people at Fleet Response and report the deer collision I had with my company vehicle on the way into Ask the Agronomist this morning. So that's a lot of fun. Let me tell you that. So I was not hurt. No airbag deploy. You can still drive the truck. It's not that big a deal. But when it's a company vehicle, everything becomes a big deal. So I started this process on the drive in, determined that I wasn't going to get it done in 15 or 20 minutes. So here's my claim number right here. And when I call the nice lady back, she assured me that she had everything that we had done up to that point entered, and she'd written a note in there. So the person I talked to, because it won't be the same one, will be able to pick up where we left off, and I can finish reporting my Fulton County deer that I bagged this morning with my bear truck. So anyway, I hope you all have a good day, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks on February 23rd. So thank you.